Which of the following would have been members of the National Christian Union and or the National Women's Loyal League? A, upper-class Catholic women, B, Polish and Russian immigrant women, C, Western frontier women, D, lower-class Baptist women, or E, northern middle-class intellectual women. E, why'd you pick E? It's right, but why? Just a hunch?
Yeah.
Yeah, well, it's a good hunch. Corey?
Probably wasn't that big back then, so I figured it would be more of the middle class.
Okay, so who were the people who, in 1880, if you were a Catholic in America, most likely you were a recent immigrant. Okay, did you have money as a woman to belong to organizations? No. So if it's anything to do with, and even it says upper class Catholic women, okay, so there were a few rich Irish from the 1830s who had become wealthy. But would rich Catholic women belong to a group called the National Christian Union? No, they would belong to something called the National Catholic Union, because there was still a certain amount of prejudice against Catholic women. Okay? Immigrant women would have been out, lower class women would have been out because they couldn't have afforded to belong to a group because they would have had to have been working themselves. Western women were working on farms and ranches and didn't have time to belong to organizations. So you're really talking about northern city women who are educated, they are rich enough that they have at least one servant, so they've got time in the afternoon to go out and be 240 pounds of sunshine or belong to a club or organization, whatever. Okay? This was definitely a question you should have attempted. Just because if you think about it even for a second, it just makes sense. What did Protestant ministers support in the 1880s and 1890s? The Second Great Awakening, pragmatism, social gospel, or perfectionism? Right, social gospel. Okay, the Second Great Awakening, first of all, is 1820s and 30s. Pragmatism is a philosophy that developed in the 1880s and 1890s, but it means it's a practical philosophy. It has nothing to do with religion. Perfectionism goes back to the early 1800s with the Transcendentalists. Okay, it's antebellum. So it leaves you with social gospel, if nothing else, which was, I just told you, a Protestant movement. Henry George was a critic of social Darwinism, and it said, the question was, what did Henry George want? And the answer was, he proposed to solve the nation's uneven distribution of wealth through a single tax on speculation. The government would then use the money to rid the misery caused by industrialization. If you didn't know who Henry George was, you should just skip this question. Because unless you're one of those people who just has a natural instinct for guessing. Settlement houses, designed for a purpose of. Who designed the first settlement house? Jane Addams. Okay? In Chicago, the purpose of them was to help immigrants become more American. They were built in the ghetto itself, or within the poor part of town where the immigrants lived. They taught immigrants English. They taught them American customs. They often helped women set up small businesses like crocheting, like they did in the jungle, whatever. They aimed at helping with child care if necessary, that kind of thing. They weren't the 240 pounds of sunshine because they didn't come from outside into the tenements. They actually lived in the tenement houses, the social workers who were these upper middle class women. All the following supported social and governmental laissez-faire, meaning the government keep their hands off. And the one that doesn't support it is social gospel, because they thought the government should get involved in helping people. Frederick Taylor and Taylorism. Taylorism is another name for scientific management, which is another name for efficiency. Okay? So Frederick Taylorism, what happened because of his scientific management ideas, workers became viewed as nothing but an interchangeable part. More efficient the factory is, the better. So if you're unable to keep up on the job, what do? We get rid of you and we get another worker. Just like if the machine part broke, we don't get rid of the whole machine, we fix the broken part and go on with machine working. A bad worker is like a broken piece on the machine. Government and labor movement in the late 1800s, people basically, except for workers, did not support labor movements. Government used troops to break up strikes. They didn't support the laborers. The first president to ever support laborers or workers was and he made the mine owners sit down and negotiate with the miners. No. Earlier. Teddy Roosevelt. Sherman Antitrust Act, the government passed it. Its intention was to break up trust, but when in the late 1800s it was used to break up unions, or try to break up unions. Why did the Knights of Labor fail? They failed because they wanted pie-in-the-sky things going on. I'm going to separate you two. Honest to Pete. They asked for pie-in-the-sky things like convict labor to end, and end to child labor, better working conditions for women, fewer working hours for women, okay? And that's why they failed, because they wanted pie in the sky. Samuel Gompers and the AFL were successful because they asked for concrete things like better wages, shorter working hours, better working conditions. Get the blood off the floor in the sausage factory, okay? Because what happens is Ben slips on the blood, falls into the sausage vat, and yum yum, that's your breakfast tomorrow morning, okay? Quote about dealing with unions or have a revolution refers to, and the answer was the Wobblies. So which union would have said it's better if the union doesn't deal with to have a revolution? The Knights of Labor, the AFL, the Wobblies, who are the industrial workers of the world, the United Mine Workers, or Save the Children Foundation, okay? Whenever you see violence, revolution, it's always the Wobblies. The Knights of Labor and the IWW, or the Wobblies, were both involved in the Haymarket Riot, combining skilled and unskilled workers, letting in blacks, restricting women, and the answer is the Haymarket Riot. The Knights of Labor did not combine skilled and unskilled workers. The IWW did. Neither one let in blacks, and they both restricted women. Haymarket Square Riot in Chicago. The McCormick Reaper plant workers went on strike to protest raising, or cutting their salaries, cutting their salaries. They were protesting peacefully in a square in Chicago. The police came on the outer fringes. Somebody threw a bomb and blew up a couple of policemen. The police retaliated, and everyone blamed the workers. Okay? The Pullman strike, what started it? The Pullman company, which made train cars, sleeper cars, raised rents. Okay, they provided housing for their workers, but you paid a rent, and so they raised the rents and lowered wages. So a strike was called. Who engineered the strike? The Pullman strike. Not the Wobblies. Eugene V. Debs, and he was a socialist. Okay, so if you see Debs, think socialist, and think Pullman strike. Eugene V. Debs, quote on the Pullman strike, "Now that I've seen labor in action, I am for socialism." Okay? And who said that? If you see socialism, just go for Debs.